Ready to elevate your leadership? Follow Take Command, a Dale Carnegie podcast now. Transform inspirations into actions. Hit follow and lead with impact. Welcome to Take Command, a Dale Carnegie podcast, the show where we seek to uncover what leadership means in today's world. I'm Joe Hart, CEO of Dale Carnegie, and we will be talking to diverse leaders with stories to tell across various industries to help unlock your potential for success. We will be sharing real-life insights into leadership, which in turn can help spark the next level of your growth as a leader. In today's episode, we have two remarkable guests who not only share a familial bond, but also embark on an entrepreneurial journey together during the challenging times of the pandemic. Our first guest is a distinguished member of the Forbes Young Entrepreneur Council and a renowned speaker on the future of food, purpose-driven brands, and climate-positive business. Please welcome the co-founder and CEO of Willa's Organic Oat Milk, Christina Dorr Drake. Our second guest boasts over 12 years of experience with Dale Carnegie training, including over 5 years as a Dale Carnegie Master Trainer. Additionally, he brings a rich background as an entrepreneur in the music and film industry. Please welcome the co-founder and head of sales of Willa's Organic Oat Milk, Rusty Drake. Well, Rusty and Christina, welcome to the Dale Carnegie Take Command podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us. Thrilled to be here.
I'm excited to have you here. I think you've really got an incredible story. You're doing some work which is really just impressive and meaningful, and I think will really resonate with our audience today. And let me just start with some background. I know, Christina, you were on a path. You had a very successful marketing career. You ultimately left that path to co-found Willa's Organic Oat Milk. And Rusty, you and I have known each other for a long time. You are certainly one of the best trainers we've had in our Dale Carnegie network, a master trainer. You've worked with us for many, many years. You were also a successful musician, business person. You also left that path to co-found Willa's with Christina, and I know Christina's sister is also involved. Tell us a little bit about that journey and what inspired you to leave those very successful paths to start something from nothing.
Yeah, I was working in advertising. I loved my career, but I felt this urge to create something that would just have a really positive impact. And we had this idea to create a plant-based milk that was actually made of plants, not artificial ingredients, not a bunch of sugar, that tasted really delicious. And my grandmother used to make oat milk. She was way ahead of her time in 1,000 ways. And we started with her super delicious recipe that used real ingredients you can recognize. And then we just kept asking questions. We were wondering why all of these oat milks had so much sugar and none of the benefits of the oat, no protein, no fiber. And what we discovered is oat milk is typically just made with oat sugar, and often the healthiest parts are discarded as food waste. And so we thought there had to be a better, more honest and sustainable way. And my sister is really the brilliant one on the team. She figured out, along with Laura, who lead R&D, how to create a really rich oat milk using the whole entire oat. So you get all the benefits of the oat, it's got less sugar, and then it's zero food waste and a better choice for the planet. And in the early days, I gave myself just a couple of months to see if we could have traction, and trying to evaluate whether or not this idea was a good idea. Rusty kept saying, it seems like a bigger risk not to try it than to try it. And I think that is a really great litmus test for anyone who's thinking about starting something new.
Well, you're really a great supporter, Rusty, to offer that to Christina. I wonder if Willis would be here if you hadn't suggested that. Maybe you were a key part in just really helping make that happen.
100%.
I might as well take credit for it. It's all me. All me. Wouldn't exist without Rusty.
You're a great team for sure. So
thank you.
It sounds like you are really making a difference, and you're in a hyper competitive industry, and you are getting a really good toehold and growing, as you said. Rusty, how about you? It was one thing maybe Christina could have said, hey, guess what, Rusty, I'm going to keep going in this business, or I want to do this. What led you to also say, hey, I'm in this as well?
We always wanted to start a business together. Christina and her sister always wanted to start a business together. Christina and I always wanted to start a business together. Like Christina said, I've always kind of had an entrepreneurial angle to my career. I started out in the film industry, and in that industry, you have to work very hard to get hired and share your ideas. And, every job is going to the next job, to the next job. I was a freelance person, and I cut my teeth in leadership at that time. At one point, I was doing some producing for Dale Carnegie Digital, and I wasn't a trainer. I wasn't even thinking about being a trainer. And then some folks started saying, "Hey, Rusty, have you ever thought about being a trainer?" And I thought, at the time, no. My parents were involved with Carnegie. They were both trainers. That was kind of their world. I've got my own thing that I'm doing. And there was a couple of folks who were really persistent and said, "You know what? We're going to get you into the training program to become a trainer. And you don't even have to ever train if you want, ever. But just go to the program, see how it goes, see what happens." So I did. When I went, I found it extremely challenging. I couldn't believe how challenging training actually was. And when I kind of smell a challenge, I can't let it go, because it's almost like if I walk away from it, it feels like I'm walking away because it was too hard. So I was thinking to myself, well, I have to actually get good at this in order to feel good about what I'm doing. And then I also started thinking that it was probably some of the most valuable training for myself that I could probably get, to become a Dale Carnegie trainer, to train people in communicating, to train people in sales, train people in presentation skills, public speaking, all of these things. It was basically a second education. And I always knew that at some point I was going to find myself in another entrepreneurial endeavor. And when that time came, I would be eternally grateful for all of the work and all of the development that I'd had through Dale Carnegie. And that's precisely what happened. So when this opportunity came up with Willa's and we all started working on it, it just felt like the right thing. It felt like the right time. And, we're all enthusiastic about it. And, I started up on board, starting up part-time, still training for a while. But it was just that it made a lot of sense. And everything that I've been doing with Carnegie led right into that in some ways.
Again, to start a business from nothing, I've done that. It's daunting. You're doing everything yourself. You're sending out the mail. You're doing everything. And that's without probably any income for a period of time, which is another part that's daunting. But what part of the Dale Carnegie training, or even some of the things that you had historically, helped prepare you for that entrepreneurial journey? What were some of the skills that were helpful?
It's a long list, and it's almost hard to instantly pinpoint them. I think that right away, communicating. I've always been fairly extroverted. I took the Dale Carnegie course, first of all, when I was in high school. And that's because my folks were involved and got me into a program. I wasn't afraid of public speaking. I enjoyed it. Attending the Carnegie course and then training really refined that. And it was just all about communicating and being able to communicate with the types of people we communicate with every day. Is really hard to put a price on that. When you're training, you're not just public speaking, you're facilitating a conversation with a group of people. It could be there's 8 people in the room, there might be 200 people in the room, there might be more. And that level of facilitation and being able to guide a conversation from introducing a concept all the way through being able to practice it and helping people have aha moments where they're learning it, that way of communicating has been critical to what we do in entrepreneurialism. And then that impacts things like negotiating, developing sales relationships, leading our team. I mean, there's so much that we do just on a day-to-day basis that I could reference to any one of the Dale Carnegie curriculums. Probably at this point are doing a lot of it unconsciously.
Yeah, it becomes a part of who you are a little bit, right? It becomes very habitual. I found the same thing. You talked about being a trainer. I found going through the process to become a Dale Carnegie trainer, not only to be daunting, but it was one of the most important things, I think, career-wise, that has helped me in terms of just how I connect and lead with other people and communicate and that type of thing.
Absolutely.
So you start Willa's, and again, that's a leap of faith. You're working on it. You've got big plans. You face a number of challenges as you launch. Christina, would you or Rusty like to talk about some of those?
Sure. I mean, I should also go back to the beginning when we were in the earliest stages of Willa's and it was just an idea. I told myself I had 3 months to see if we had any traction and if we had signals that we were on to something to continue. And we kept having these little signs, but then we had this whole plan of launching in co-working spaces, offices, and coffee shops in March of 2020 in New York City. And we had spent a year and a half getting ready for that big launch. And we just got blindsided by, one thing after another, including, of course, COVID. And, on the business side, now it's kind of funny. It's like, oh, remember when we thought we were launching in food service? But back then, we really had to kind of erase our memories of our whole strategy and think about, what does this moment call for? What do we have to shift and change? And we got on Amazon. We started launching our direct-to-consumer business. We had some retailers reach out, so we started testing out launching at retail. But it was just a time when we just felt like all of this work we had done had to be shelved for a minute. And then personally, at 36 years old, I was blindsided by a breast cancer diagnosis in January of 2020, which was terrifying. I'm super grateful. We caught it early. I highly recommend to everyone out there, do your self-exams. Thankfully, we caught it early and I had the best possible response to treatment. But we launched Willa's through chemo, immunotherapies, radiation, lumpectomy, and lymph node surgery. I worked full-time building the business through the whole thing. And I feel really grateful for that. I'm cancer-free now. I have hair again. It's a whole new world. But it was just a time of really teaching us that every day you're going to be solving problems as a business owner. That doesn't stop. And I believe that part of the reason our team is so resilient and probably has a lot of confidence in ways that a lot of businesses at our stage just aren't quite there yet, is simply because we got through that time. And in many ways, it gave us much stronger foundation, much more diversified sales channels and business model. And as a team, we learned that we can really solve any problem and get through anything together. It was a year that I would not wish on my worst enemy. At the same time, it made us all a lot stronger and made the business foundation much stronger.
Well, Christina, first of all, thank goodness that you got through that and that you were cancer-free and healthy. I can only imagine what you learned going through that process. What advice would you have for our listeners about when we are in times of adversity? What are things that they can draw upon from your experience?
Getting a diagnosis like that, especially when you're somebody who's a health nut, it really turns your world upside down. And when you're going through something like cancer, you feel like a lot of things are being done to you. You're going in and they're giving you chemo infusions. You're going in and you're getting medicine, you're getting radiation. You feel very powerless. And I felt like I needed to take some ownership in my treatment plan and have some agency in it and feel like I was a part of the care team and the medical team. So I worked out after every chemo treatment, which they don't always tell you, but actually improves the effectiveness of the chemo. I ate a mostly plant-based diet, and I decided that I was going to do things every single day that made me feel better. And, when you're a business owner, it's really easy to say like, oh, there's no time for that. I have to focus on these other things. But it made me realize that all of a sudden I was making time every day over, kind of lunchtime to do a workout or meditations or journaling. And I was like, why is it that a health crisis is the moment when I'm giving myself permission to carve out time to do things that make me feel at my best? Like, why am I only giving myself permission to do these things now? I put my workouts on the calendar. I meditate if I feel like I need a minute. I've got the Headspace app. I journal if I feel like I need to work through something. It made me realize that as a business owner, in order for you to really be there for your team, in order to really make the best possible decisions and think strategically, you have to care for your mental and physical health, or you can't be there for the business or anyone else.
Well, I so appreciate what you're saying. Maybe one of the lessons that you took from that was just the importance of being intentional. It sounds like maybe in that moment you were reactive to the situation, but you said, I'm not going to let this control me. Why am I not doing these things? And certainly it's one of the things we teach in the Dale Carnegie course is about the importance of living an intentional life and taking command and prioritizing our days in a way that says, hey, I'm going to do some things that are fulfilling and healthy for me. Rusty, how about yourself? You were co-founding this company, you're going through this gauntlet, this really challenging time, you're supporting Christina. What were the things that were going through your mind, and how did you find the positivity and the mindset to kind of keep pushing forward in a constructive and strong way?
It was a horrible time. It was extremely challenging, to be worried about not just the entire world, when the pandemic was just starting, everybody was terrified. We're living here in New York, we're in Brooklyn, we're right at the epicenter of the whole thing. But to have Christina going through cancer treatment at the same time where we're trying to get this business launched, it was terrifying. Like Christina said, At this point, though, I'm very proud of everything that we've accomplished and the fact that we got to the other end of it. I know that the ways that we got there had to do with some of the things Christina started mentioning, that intentionality of trying to figure out how we can possibly deal with the intense challenges that we were facing at that time. So we believe, both of us very strongly in working on our own mental health. So thankfully, I had already started a meditation practice a few years prior to all this. So I had kind of laid the groundwork to being ready to continue a meditation practice whilst all this was going on. So I continued meditating. I had seen a therapist in the past, but didn't have one at the time. So I started looking for a new therapist. I ended up finding one that I absolutely love. I'm still seeing her now, seeking out that type of help, knowing that the types of things that I'm dealing with on a personal level aren't the types of things that one needs to deal with all on their own. We also believe in really working hard on our relationship with each other. And this impacts both our personal life, but also our professional life together. So we do couples therapy. We talk about it very openly. We think that it's something that's really important to, like I said, our personal relationship and our business. We do therapy sessions with our co-founder, Elena. Christina and Elena have done a lot of therapy together. So from a standpoint of how do we get through this, we've all been really just working on ourselves and working on ourselves together. And one of the biggest learnings, and I think a good way, if we're thinking about what advice we can give people from this type of thing, is that we've become very clear about our desire to pass this forward to our team. So for example, we don't hide at all the fact that we work on ourselves and that we go to therapy. My personal therapy happens to happen at midday on Wednesday. I have therapy over lunchtime, and it's right there on my calendar, Rusty Therapy. And if I'm meeting with one of our team members and it's time for me to go, I'll say I'm off to my therapy session. Or maybe sometimes I'll learn something in therapy that I'll bring up and say, hey, my therapist said something interesting. And Christina will do the same. We really want to normalize it. And we've even said to our employees in the past, the reason we keep talking about therapy is we want you all to know that we believe therapy is important. We believe working on oneself is important. We believe that at our company, at Willa's, working on oneself should be part of the accepted culture. We recommend seeing a therapist, and we are actively working to try to make working on mental health an open thing here at Willa's.
And building on that, in the very early days of Willa's, we were listening to all these podcasts of founders, all these founder stories. And I noticed the common denominator amongst the founders who were either, still friends, starting new businesses together, still married, still had really great relationships, was that they were all proactively seeing a therapist or a coach together. And that was a real aha moment for me, because I started a business with my sister and my husband, two of the most important relationships in my life. When I realized that that was something that I kept seeing as a pattern in all these founder stories, I felt like that was incredibly empowering, that you could proactively just make sure that you're communicating and that everyone feels understood and heard and seen. And if somebody's having some fears around something, that like you can just talk about it versus, letting something bubble up.
It's wonderful that you are advocates for this. I mean, so often we think about leadership, and if we want to give the best of who we are to other people, you can't teach what you don't have. So if I find myself in a situation where I am anxious and stressed and angry and frustrated and edgy, that's going to come off on the other people. And there are a whole range of different things. Therapy is one that can be very valuable. You mentioned coaching, Christina. Some of the most successful people I have worked with, I've had coaches throughout my career in different capacities, and I've always found it very valuable. But it seems to me that really what you're talking about is ensuring that there's personal mental health, there is resilience, there's inner strength, so that you can also lead with that. How do you find that you are a better leader as a result of the different things that you have done? How do all these things come together and help you be better leaders?
I think a big piece of starting a business that you have to reckon with is that all of your insecurities, all of your fears are going to be looking you right in the eye every single day. You can't hide from them as a business owner. They're going to show up in all different parts of your days and conversations. And I think you have to kind of acknowledge that and be willing to be vulnerable about it, and also be willing to just take the time to give that space to understand what's going on and why you're feeling that way. so that you're not just projecting those fears on other people. So you can take a step back and say, okay, I'm feeling some fear right now. There it is again, fear, always there, just hanging out, ready to kind of pop up. And what do I want to do with that information? What is the evidence I have? And I feel like, Rusty talks a lot about the How to Stop Worrying book. And I feel like that's a huge tenet of that.
Yes, I would say, bringing it back to Dale Carnegie, I love all of Dale Carnegie's books. How to Win Friends and Influence People is one of the great books of all time. For me personally, the book that has brought me the most personal growth at important times is How to Stop Worrying and Start Living. Throughout my life, there's been all sorts of times where I've entered into a place of being down or in kind of a dark place. And I've gone to that book and just reading a few sentences, even a few pages, can put me back on the right track. And I will say that the same thing is true over this course of this time in the past few years, I should say. I went to that book quite a few times. An example of that is when in the first year or so, when all this was going on, I was having a real tough time going to sleep. Just that mind racing at night, with the pandemic and us stuck in our apartment in New York City. Christina's sick. And what are we going to do about this? What are we going to do about that? And just my mind racing. And we had so many things to do each day. It was impossible to go to bed having checked off everything on the to-do list because the to-do list is too long. So I would just be lying in bed with my head spinning. One of the things that I often do, especially with the ideas from How to Stop Worrying and Start Living, is to combine principles. So we talk a lot about principles in Dale Carnegie, and each principle is basically a concept that he brings up as a chapter in each of his books. And a lot of them work really well in conjunction with each other. So there's one that says, give a thing as much anxiety as it's worth and refuse to give it more. Then there's another one that's essentially, do the very best you can. So what started happening is I'd be lying in bed awake with my head spinning, thinking about all the things I should be doing and how am I going to help, how are we going to get through this, et cetera, et cetera. And then I started realizing I could use these principles. So I'd kind of take a step back and say, okay, looking back on my day, did I do the very best I can with the time that I had? And I would kind of go through the day and I'd think, well, yeah, I did that and I did that. I worked really hard and I really checked a lot of things off the list. It's a never-ending list. So I didn't get everything done, but I really got a lot done. And actually, I put my best foot forward in everything that I did. And I actually had this accomplishment, this accomplishment, this accomplishment. And so then I would follow that up and say, okay, so is it safe to say that you've given this all the anxiety that it's worth right now? And then I would think to myself, well, yeah, I think that I have. I've been stressing about this now for the last half hour trying to sleep. I think I put a lot of thought into it. I think I can safely say that I don't need to give it any more anxiety. And then doing those two things together, it was like magic. I would relax, calm down, and within a few minutes, I was asleep. The last few years, that's developed into something that I almost don't have to think about doing. At this point, I sleep great, despite all the stressors in our lives. Like one of the things I don't have a problem with at this current point in my life is falling asleep. I'll fall asleep, light goes out, 5 minutes later, I'm out. It was a really interesting thing. It's one of those things where going through all these types of challenges, you end up on the other end having grown. And this would be an example of a time where I grew in a way that really benefited me long term.
Well, I'm sure the comment about sleep is something that so many people can resonate with. For years, I struggled with sleep, just like you did. I find myself now sleeping so much better. And I go back to something that Christina said. You were talking about resilience and why your team is so resilient. You look back at all the things you went through and you're like, hey, we made it through all of these things. It's going to be okay. We can do it. That's so much of having this humble sense about, look, I can only do what I can only do. Did I do my best? I did my best, so what more can I do? I'll focus on it tomorrow. I think it's a really important lesson. I just know even for myself during the pandemic, I picked up How to Stop Worrying and Start Living because I was struggling with sleep. And one of the most important chapters that Dale Carnegie talks about is the most valuable lesson he ever learned was about the importance of what we think. If I know what you think, I know who you are. And, you've got people, they'll find adversity and opportunity instead of opportunity and adversity. So much of it goes to mindset, right?
Absolutely. And you think about how much that impacts, even if people aren't seeing it on the outside, how much that impacts our own day-to-day, how we're viewing our own life, how we're viewing the opportunities or challenges that come up, how we face them. And then I have to believe those things project outward. People on our team and elsewhere start to feel that.
Yeah, I think in the early days of starting a business, we would look at a really good day as a day that had really great sales or we got a big customer. And then you start to realize that every single day you're going to be solving problems. Like I said, that's not going to stop. And now we really celebrate when we come together as a team and come up with a really creative, collaborative solution to whatever problem or whatever challenge popped up. And we celebrate those even more, which I think is one of the biggest learnings. I don't know, I personally have had, having gone through such a roller coaster of the last few years.
Sounds like that's one of many, many valuable lessons that you had. I want to turn to the business for a second because one thing that strikes me about what you're doing is you've taken on giants, so to speak. It's the David and Goliath kind of a thing. You're in the food and beverage category. You've created a product and a brand, and you've got some things that are really unique about what you're doing. You're using the whole oat. You're focused on sustainability. One of the things I love about what you're doing with your product is that it's got a lot less sugar. So often with oat milk, the second or third most common ingredient is sugar. So you've got some things that are differentiating you, and yet this is a monumental undertaking that you have. What's the business strategy that you have, would you say? What lessons might you have for people who are in business and thinking about how do we overcome competitive threats? How do we overcome competitors who may be bigger than or stronger than we are?
We talk a lot on the Willa's team about how every decision we make, everything we do, every way we would behave as a business has to live up to our values. And that extends to so many different aspects of the business, from the products to the give back campaigns. When we started, we couldn't understand, like you said, why there was so much sugar in plant-based milks. I think a lot of our competitors probably look at what we spend on our ingredients. Like, we use organic ingredients. We use single origin Peruvian cacao that's sourced directly from indigenous farmer cooperatives, because the cacao trade is just associated with the worst aspects of humanity. Child slave labor, terrible things. So we wanted to work with a really amazing partner on that. We tried to create products that taste super delicious and have less sugar and have real ingredients. That's not easy to do, but it's the right thing to do. And I think knowing that we have our values and they're really clear, and everything we do has to live up to my grandmother Willa's name. The recipes were all created from her inspiration. That gives us a really clear North Star. And I think it's a big part of why, especially in the past year, we've seen such demand for a product like ours that, you can feel good about drinking every day and giving to your family.
You've created something that there's a substance to it that really is resonating with people. It's healthier, it's better for the environment, and you're marketing it very effectively. And yet I want to ask it a little bit more, Christina, because still sometimes the best products are not the ones that succeed in the marketplace. You are succeeding in the marketplace. So how are you getting around some of the noise? How are you competing with people who have tens or hundreds or thousands of times more marketing budget than you are? And again, you're growing, and I believe that at some point you could be $1 billion brand, but today you're on your way. So how are you doing that?
When we started Willa's, people still thought most of the plant-based milk options were super healthy. And a lot of people were sort of like, why are you creating this product with organic ingredients? Why are you doing this whole oat process? Like, why are we talking about sugar? Aren't all the options that are alternatives healthy? What we've seen over the past year is plant-based milk drinkers are increasingly looking for less sugar, real ingredients they can recognize, organic, no Roundup. And that has been a big piece of our success. We're filling this gap in the market. There's sort of a big brand, and then there's a lot of copycats, and then there's Willa's. The other thing that we did that was probably one of the best decisions we ever made is we made an oat milk with packaging that was super brightly colored in a sea of white and beige and gray. So we knew that somebody who is looking for something different would hopefully see it and be curious enough to pick it up and turn it around and look at the nutrition label. And then the other thing we did that was huge is, in the very early days, this was actually right before the pandemic, we were doing these tasting events at WeWorks and co-working spaces, making matcha lattes and cocktails with oat milk. And we talked to, at each of these events, 80 to 200 people. So we got direct feedback, questions. We learned so much about our customers that way. And that really helped us position the product and the brand in a way where we could launch in a store without having access to being able to do sampling because it was a pandemic, and still perform really, really well because we were creating something that was what people were looking for in the category.
It's great that you did that. And maybe that's part of the answer. People who are really looking for just that right thing for themselves, the thing that's healthy and sustainable and so forth. You've got that. Rusty, you're the chief growth officer for Willa's. You're the person working to create the billion-dollar brand here. Well, I mean, you both are, your whole company is, but I mean, you're the chief growth officer. So what's the biggest challenge you'd say that you have that the company has to overcome right now? What are some of the things that you're doing to go about overcoming that?
We're involved in a lot of different things, meaning that it kind of goes back in some ways to the pandemic. The fact that we launched in April 2020, I mean, our original plan was hyper-focused. We came up with it, in 2019. The plan was to focus on New York City, and we were going to focus on coffee shops and office spaces. That was it. We were going to wait on retail. We were going to wait on e-commerce. We had it dialed in. Then, of course, the pandemic happens. Lockdowns happened right when our first oat milk was delivered to our warehouse in New York. So it all happened at the exact same time. Coffee shops closed, offices closed. We had to shift. So, we pivoted like everybody else, ended up launching in January 2021 online and in retail. Since then, offices are back, coffee shops are open again. Now we're involved in multiple channels much sooner than we had ever planned. And it means we have a lot to do in all these different channels. And each channel is a completely different world unto its own. They're not the same. A large company would have an entire team devoted to each channel. Because we're such a small company, there's just a few of us, and we're trying to make sure that we're growing in all these different channels. So having a lot going on in a lot of different areas is one of our biggest challenges. And you would think that getting things like set up in retail, for example, is really easy. You find a distributor, you sell into a grocery store, everything then is like clockwork. Every time the grocery store needs more product, they get more from the distributor. And every time the distributor needs more, they get more from us, and it works really well. It turns out it's not really that way. And, if I'm thinking about how I sell, if I'm thinking about sales, for example, I very much come from the standpoint, we talk in Carnegie about relationship selling. That's me. I am very much a relationship seller. My strong suits are connecting with people, developing relationships, finding common ground, building friendships in whatever industry I'm working in, and, having that facilitate things like negotiation, working together, and selling. That works very well in a lot of aspects of what we're doing. So if I'm speaking to a grocery store manager or owner or coffee shop owner, for example, that's where my skill sets shine. But like I said, all of these different industries have their own language. They have their own etiquette. They have their own dialect. You know what I mean? They have all these different things. And I've never worked in food and beverage before. This is the very first time I've ever tried to sell anything into a grocery store. One of the ways we've been working to overcome some of the challenges we've had is figuring out how we can essentially marry the skill sets that we have with the skill sets that we need. So one thing that's working really well for us right now is finding people who are better than us at certain things and bringing them on board. So right now we have a new sales director who's been in the industry in retail sales for 20 years. Willis does not have time to wait for me to get 20 years experience in retail sales. We need somebody with that experience right now. So his experience of all the nuance, all the ways to communicate with distributors, what to say to retailers and distributors when we have to solve problems, that combined with my natural skill sets in terms of being able to speak to people, being a creative problem solver, finding unique ways to overcome solutions and find ways to negotiate that are maybe outside the box. That's working really, really well to overcome some of those things. It's critical that we've, continue to find those ways to do that and to figure out how we can bring in the types of skill sets that we need.
It's pretty incredible when you see like Rusty's Carnegie style combined with somebody who knows all of the details and nuances of this business. It's not 1 + 1 = 2. It's like 1 + 1 = 10. It all sort of compounds. The same goes for, working with our manufacturer and Laura on our team, who's got a whole background in R&D and product development. If we're working through negotiation or problem solving, those Carnegie skills can kind of plus up everything around them and really unlock things for the whole team, just getting us all to think a little bit differently.
You're really highlighting too, just the importance that individual strengths bring to the team, right? I mean, if we really want to have a high performing team, you're never going to have the experience of the person who's got 20 years of experience in retail or manufacturing or whatnot, but they may not have the experience that you have in Carnegie. And so, like you said, Christina, it truly is. When we bring our authentic selves, when there's an environment where people are able to do that and work together effectively, real incredible things can happen. So it's exciting to see that. One of the things that I've been doing on the podcast recently is going to Chat GPT. I went to Chat GPT before this interview and I said, I'm interviewing Rusty and Christina from Willa's Organic Oat Milk, and gave them a little bit of information about the podcast. And I said to Chat GPT, if you were to ask Rusty and Christina one question, what would that one question be? I'm going to actually have two questions because it gave me a follow-up question, but I'm going to ask the first question right now, and then we'll go to the second one. So the first question is, what is the single most important piece of advice or lesson you've learned on your entrepreneurial journey with Willa's Oat Milk that you believe can help our audience find their inner strength, build enduring relationships, get promoted in their jobs, and live the life that they want?
Well, that's interesting. So I'm thinking about it from a couple different perspectives. Instantly, my mind goes to what's the lesson towards starting a company and building a team. And then also I hear in that there's also what are the lessons for an individual? I would say the single most important factor in being able to get to where we've been, as far as the team is related, is empowerment. It's really important to think about from the standpoint of we are a tiny company. In terms of the number of people working on Willa's, it's a small team, and we're trying to do a lot. And our team is excellent. Everyone's got incredible skill sets, and everybody on the team thrives in doing new things. And each week, we're all learning new things that we've never done before. We have people on the team who are interns in college, and people up, pretty much any generation in the workforce right now. And we're all doing new things all the time. We were talking about skill sets and bringing people on board that have skill sets that we don't have. Well, in some cases on our team, something comes up that we have to get done that nobody has ever done before, not a single person. And you think about, okay, as a leader, how can we actually make this happen? In Dale Carnegie, we talk a lot about delegating, how delegating is a process, where you explain the why. Why does this thing need to get done? And you show them examples of how it can be done, and then get them involved in figuring out a solution and, all these different things. But in a situation where Christina or I have never done the thing before, it becomes a bit more nuanced, right? Because we're delegating something that we've never even done. We can't even properly coach somebody. So that idea of empowerment comes back to, thinking about some of our team members. We got excellent interns. We've always had excellent interns, and some of them have stayed on with Willa's and just become extremely high-performing employees. And we'll go to them sometimes and say something along the lines of, okay, there's this thing that needs to get done, this project, and we have to make it happen. And I've never done it before. Christina's never done it before. None of us have done it before. We don't even know what to tell you to do. All we can say is maybe here's some good places that we could, look for information. Here's some, things we could Google. Here's some thoughts around how we could get this started. Would you be open to taking this project on, putting a plan together to see how we can make this work? And we'll continue meeting about it, and we'll work together to make it happen. And our team members always say yes. And often they'll say things like, oh yeah, I'm going to go out and watch some YouTube tutorials, and I'll do some other things, and I'll Google it. And then we'll get together with them later in the day or the next day. And they've got a plan. And then we start testing things and implementing them. And before you know it, within the next few days, the project is in motion. And then, of course, eventually as time goes on, the project's done and we move on to the new thing. And our team is learning all these new things that none of us have ever done before. And it comes through that sense of empowerment and helping people understand the why we're doing something, but being honest in that we don't necessarily know how to do it. So let's figure it out together. And will you go ahead and lead this and bring back the plan and, take part in figuring out how to do this? It's been monumental.
I would say it goes beyond, I'm amazed by them because, we'll say, can you figure out this thing? And they'll never have done it before. And they'll say, oh, I'll figure it out. And, I think there's a lot of courage in that, but I think our whole team really shares this entrepreneurial sort of creative problem solving ability. And I think a big part of it is curiosity. I just keep coming back to that in personal and professional life. If you can go into the world with curiosity about the people that are around you, about the possibilities beyond the solutions that are maybe obvious, but just trying to be curious and open about things that you might not have even considered, being curious about new skills that you might not think that you're really going to be the best at, but being curious enough to like ask other people who do know a thing or two about it, try to give it a shot alongside someone else. I think that's really the key, especially if you want to do something entrepreneurial or work at a startup or be on the ground floor of something like Willa's.
And that gave me a thought that I can add to. So building off what Christina said, if we come back to what's a piece of advice for an individual, going out there in the world or trying to do things, that curiosity piece Christina mentioned. I'm 44 now, so we started this business right when I was about turning 40. And I would say that over the course of my life, I have not been that great about asking for help. It's not that I wasn't good at it, but I wasn't very comfortable with it. So I wouldn't do it. Sometimes I did, but it wasn't my natural instinct to go and just ask people how to do something. Christina, on the other hand, ever since I first met her, that's been one of her skill sets. When I first knew her, she was working in advertising. And when she would go find a new job, she would just dive into informational interviews, ask people a bunch of questions. Next thing you know, she had a new job. And I was always really impressed with that. And when we started Willa's, it was Christina who really encouraged that we just start asking people in our network what to do. We had never founded a company like this. So the very first thing we did is we started asking anybody who ever started a company, hey, would you meet with us for a few minutes? Then we'd ask them open-ended questions like, how did you get started?
What are the pitfalls to avoid?
What worked? What didn't?
Yeah.
What would you suggest? We always ended the conversation with the question, could be worded lots of different ways, but essentially, who else do you know that we should talk to? Or who else do you think would be open to talking with us?
Or someone we should meet with to talk about X problem or X opportunity.
Yep. So that person would usually connect us with another person or two or three. And then those people would connect us with a person or two or three. And the next thing you know, on an exponential level, our network grew. And pretty soon we were learning things, not just how to start a business, but how to fundraise, how to hire, how to navigate the founder community. All of these different things that all came from asking questions, showing curiosity, and that money question, who else do you know that I should talk to? Everybody who's trying to get going in the world, trying to do something that they either don't know or that they want to get better at, ask questions.
That last question is the money question, which is who else do you know? And I have found, and it sounds like this is what you're saying too, so many people are willing to help.
Yeah.
A lot of times someone might say, well, gosh, I don't want to bother someone and so forth. But number one, people, are willing to share their knowledge and to tell you what they did and to make introductions. So many of us have had people who helped us along the way and are willing just to pay it forward and to help other people. I think part of what you're also touching on, which so many leaders in this podcast talk about, is the importance of humility, to have the humility to say, look, I don't have all the answers. I'm not going to have all the answers. How can I learn? And whether that's from outside the organization, whether it's to ask team members who might be in the front line, the manufacturer, the retail salesperson, anybody, how do you do this? And people are just incredibly capable. Going back to the intern example, or any of us, what are the things that we can learn when we get curious and we just take a shot? So the final question, although I'm going to ask you at the end how people can get Willa's and where they get more information about your product, but in one or two sentences, this is the final ChatGPT question. What is one actionable step or change in mindset that our listeners can implement immediately to move closer to achieving their goals, just as you are doing with Willa's Oat Milk?
I go back to James Clear's quote. He wrote Atomic Habits. He says, you don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. So when you're setting goals, when you're thinking about where you want to go and what you want to do, making sure that you also take a minute to say, okay, what are the things I need to do to set myself up for success for that? And if I don't know what those things are, then who can I ask? How can I get the information that I need? How can I create a plan that's doable and reasonable, and it's going to help me get there? I think it's really easy to get discouraged as somebody who's got an idea around entrepreneurship because there's so much you could be spending your time on. That was what was so helpful to us, to ask around so we could create the system that we needed to get there and be successful at it. As a cancer survivor, you realize that there are no dress rehearsals in life. That can change your mindset day to day. And suddenly some of your fears might not seem as scary, oddly enough.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that will be tremendously inspiring for people just to hear that and to see what you've done and to do something themselves. They don't have to wait until God forbid something catastrophic happens, make the change now. Okay, awesome. Thank you. Rusty, how about yourself? One actionable step or change in mindset, 1 or 2 sentences.
Be comfortable asking for help and asking questions. And it's going to help you learn everything that you don't know or that you think you don't know and help you get to where you really want to go.
You're living that example, and certainly the example teaches, as we've said. So people want to buy Willa's, try Willa's. Where can they do that?
Head to willaskitchen.com, WILLASKITCHEN, or Amazon. If you're in LA, it's in Erewhon, Bristol Farms, Foxtrot in Chicago and Texas, Central Market in Texas as well, Union Market, Citarella in New York City. And again, Amazon Prime is always easy too.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And thank you for being with me today, for sharing so much of who you are with our audience. I know this has been meaningful to me and inspiring, and I know it is for them as well.
Thank you so
Excellent.
much.
Thanks, Joe. Appreciate it.
Join us and order a copy of Take Command in hardcover, ebook, or audiobook format at your favorite bookseller or at takecommandbook.io. Also, you can visit takecommand.com for more information about the book and additional resources. I hope you enjoyed this edition of Take Command, a Dale Carnegie podcast. Check out our resources at www.dalecarnegie.com for more research, insight, and tools that will support your success and help you take command of your leadership potential. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating it and following us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. For more exclusive content, subscribe to our Dale Carnegie YouTube channel and follow us on social media. As always, thank you for listening, and we're looking forward to you joining us at the next episode of Take Command, a Dale Carnegie podcast.